Okay, I'm going to do a quick explanation as to what the modes are. Now, the modes are generally referred to as modes of the major scale. And the major scale is the Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do scale that we all know from Sound of Music and is generally accepted as being the parent major scale, or, you know, the most important or one of the most important scales that makes up Western music. So, what is a mode? Well, it's probably a lot simpler than you think if you don't already know what modes are. So let's just quickly look at the major scale, and then we can basically look at what the modes are and what they're called. Okay, here's the major scale, which I know you all know, and it's in C, and it sounds like this. Okay, I'm sure you're familiar with that sound. I can do it across 2 octaves. Okay, seems simple enough. Obviously you can play it in lots of other positions, but this is a position that is generally taught as the first kind of default position of this scale. Now, what is a mode? Well, it's simply this. You start the scale from a different degree. Now, a degree is a posh word for a different note. So, if I start the scale on C, I have C major. The modal name for that is C Ionian, okay? Because the major scale has an Ionian name as its modal name, because it actually comes from ancient Greek. Now, if I take that exact same scale, but just start it on D, the second note of the scale, or the second degree, as some people would say, it would sound like this. Okay, and to make it look slightly different, I'm going to play exactly the same notes, but instead of playing them in the same position, I'm going to play them just 2 frets up, so it's this now. Okay, so the only difference between those 2 scales is this. One goes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and back to C, being the octave above the original note. The second scale, the only difference is it goes D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, finishing on D, being an octave above. So it's exactly the same scale, except it starts 1 note further on in the scale. So instead of starting on C, it starts on D. And then that scale has a name, and that scale is Dorian. Okay, so if we start the scale on C, it's called Ionian or major scale. If we start the note on D, it's now Dorian. Okay, if we now start the scale on the 3rd degree or 3rd note of the scale, and let's go up 3, 1, 2, 3, okay, if we start it there, that's called Phrygian, okay, and I'll just move that up so we have the next position. And I basically just went across. Now, I don't want to spend the whole DVD giving you all the notes to the scale because they're quite easy to work out for yourself. And the reason for explaining this is to make stuff that we're going to be doing later on in the DVD make sense, not because it's a DVD about modes, but there'll be certain things I'll be talking about that will be confusing if you don't understand what the modes are. So, just recapping, we have C major, D Dorian, E Phrygian. Okay, so if we start the scale on the 4th degree or 4th note of the scale, we'll be starting on F, and that sound will be this. Okay, and that's called Lydian, F Lydian. Okay, so I can also start the scale from moving up another position after E, and then that will sound like this. Okay, so we have starting with Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian. Okay, now if we start the scale on the 5th degree or 5th note of the scale, it will sound like this. Okay, and that is called mixolydian. Okay, so I'm going to just move it down the fret now. Obviously the position would be here if I carried on going up, but I think just to make it look a little bit easier, with the frets a little bit wider apart, here's the scale. That's G mixolydian. Okay, so C Ionian, D Dorian, E Phrygian, F Lydian, G mixolydian. Now let's keep in mind that I'm only playing notes from the C major scale. It's just a question of where I'm starting. Okay, so let's move to the next scale, which is going to be starting on A. So if we go back to our position, this is going to be mode number 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's an A note, so we play the scale. Now this is called A Aeolian, and another name for it is natural minor. Okay, so again, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, mixolydian, Aeolian, or natural minor. Okay, so let's move on to mode number 7, and that's going to be starting on B, and it sounds like this. Now that scale is called Locrian, the Locrian mode. Okay, so if I move that down the neck an octave so you can see it, it's going to be just behind the C. It sounds like this. Okay, so let's just go through the modes once again. C Ionian, or major scale. D Dorian. E Phrygian, F Lydian, G mixolydian, A Aeolian or natural minor, and finally B Locrian. And you may have noticed there I didn't play the scale position for the Aeolian down in the bottom position, but I did it that time and there it was. And I'm sure a lot of you are probably very familiar with that particular position there. Very popular scale among rock players, the Aeolian or natural minor scale. Okay, so in conclusion, the reason I'm showing you this is so that when we talk about stuff later on, as I said before, it's not going to be so confusing. And all you need to remember is that it's like going on a journey through some notes, okay? It's literally where you start and where you end, and that is it. Now, the use of modes is a much, much deeper and more complicated subject, but what they are is what I'm telling you now. Okay, so it's good to get those names under your belt, and then that'll be very, very useful for when you come to understanding other things with chords, scales, and lots of other theory.